Hello friends, I hope you're happy and well. In today's landscape photography video, I have come to Ardnamurchan Lighthouse, which you can see behind me. Now I've been here about half an hour. I was hoping to take some really dramatic photographs and then show you, because there was this massive rainstorm that was just crossing across the background, and I managed to get a photograph of it. But when I started doing the video, I had catastrophic failure with the tripod and the camera. So now that I've managed to fix that, unfortunately the rainstorm is completely gone. But about half an hour ago there was no light at all. It was just completely dark. So this big thick patch of rain going across those mountains in the background, so you could just about see them, and hopefully I've picked those up on the image. And really I think the aspect of a panorama suited this photograph, because the rainstorm was right out there on the horizon of the sea. While there's some lovely beautiful rocks down here, they're all very dark, and I think it would be quite difficult to pick up lots of detail in them. So really what I wanted was a thin photograph with the lighthouse showing its purpose really, and that is in bad weather. So it was ideal just seeing all these really heavy rain clouds in the background. There were heavy waves coming in, splashing around the bottom. So having about a 2 or 3 second exposure meant all the water was blurred and looked very stormy. It's quite a difficult photograph here because you're looking up at the lighthouse, so you've got to be careful if you're using a wide angle lens. If you point it down too much, you'll get lens distortion, so the lighthouse will start to tilt. What I had to do was just to put the horizon right at the center of the photograph, so that lighthouse will also be perfectly level. Right, so we've got the lighthouse just behind you, and I've just come around the bay. We've got a lovely little cafe here, and the views are spectacular. We've got this lovely bay just going around here with some nice headlands at the back. Now at the moment the light isn't anything to write home about, but there's some amazing little outcrops of rocks down there. So what I'm going to try and do is just take a photograph, either portrait or landscape, I haven't decided yet, to try and get all those layers of outcrops and rock with all the water coming in, and then hopefully all the waves just crashing around those rocks should give a lot of dimension to the photograph. Because at the moment, because there's no real light, it looks quite flat, and at the top we've got some quite foreboding clouds. So I'm going to use a 2-stop neutral density filter just to darken the sky, so the graduated area is roughly just touching the hills. We haven't got any light to speak of, so I really want to make some drama of the sky. And then because it's quite flat in the foreground, all this water just going in between each one of those layers of outcrop of rocks, hopefully going from the foreground all the way up to the background, should give a lot more depth to the photograph. What I'm going to do now is just go down the path and see if I can get right onto the rocks. What I expect I'm going to do is lose all the perspective of the rocks, because at the moment we're looking from a quite high vantage point, so we'll have all the layers of rocks going on top of each other, sticking out into the sea. But as I get lower, I'm going to lose those. So what I'm mostly likely going to have to do is just look for some foreground interest, and hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 bits of outcrop of rock sticking out, enough to give some depth into the photograph. Okay, as you can see, I've come down to the beach, and it is particularly spectacular. There are all these amazing rock formations down here. We've got some round ones, some quite sharp ones going down into the sea, but they've all got this lovely lichen on them. So what I'm going to try and do is really get some close-ups of the detail of these rocks. And what I also think is quite interesting is we're getting some really powerful waves coming in. So I might do some long exposures to try and blur the water around these jagged rocks. And especially if you've got some really jagged rocks and some really long exposure of the water kind of softens the image. And quite often that works to make it either quite calming or adds more atmosphere. So those are the kind of photos I'm going to try and go for. As I've come down here, the rocks that I took further up there, looking that way, because we're higher up, you could see all these rock outcrops that gave some position and distance into the scene. But unfortunately, because of we're lower down, you lose all that perspective. So I won't be able to get all of those layers in the image, but what I can do is get some really close up foreground to really try and force this perspective between the foreground and that lovely mountainous background. Okay, so I've come a bit further up on the rocks here, and if you can just look down here, we've got some really amazing jagged rocks, and they're all sticking up in the air, and they've all got like little slits in them which offer lots of tiny little leading lines, and they all go out to the sea. And I've worked this area a little bit to try and get the best composition, because there's so many different jagged rocks. Each slight movement, it could be even a metre one way or a metre the other way, will give you a completely different photograph. So what I did was I've just worked this little area here, and there's a slight gap just down the bottom where you can see there's a little bit of a beach, and you can see the sand through the water. So when the tide is out, you can just see sand there, but at the moment as it's coming in, it's all underwater. But we're having these amazing strong waves just washing in, and you can see all this white water at the moment. There's so much froth, and I'm using that to my advantage. So normally I don't really like too much white in an image. The lighter areas are usually quite distracting, but if you look at them at the moment, they're all moving around with each wave, and it's coming backwards and forwards, going around the rocks. So there's all these swirly patterns all around the pretty much entire area that I'm photographing. So what that lends itself to is some really beautiful patterns. Now the timing for these kind of photographs is really tricky and quite important. What I've been doing in this scenario is take different exposures. When I take a long exposure, it's really blurry, really soft, and it doesn't give that atmosphere. So what I've been doing is timing the waves so they're just coming in and hitting, and I've got about 2 to 2.5 second exposure. So that gives a lot of jumbled up water, but also enough to blur that water slightly, just to take the edge off it, but give nice patterns and leave these lovely little lines around the rocks. And especially if it's a wave has gone over the rock and it's washing down, you get these lovely patterns on the rock itself. As for composition goes, I've gone up quite close with these rocks in the foreground and just pointed the camera down in portrait to try and capture as much the rock detail and foreground interest as I can. And then that leads into the midground, so you've got water flowing around those rocks, which gives a bit of flow into the midground, and then you've got the midground going into the background. Now unfortunately at the moment the sun hasn't appeared, so we don't have any light, but hopefully the movement in the water will brighten the image and add a bit of depth throughout the image. So that should work, as well as having some nice light on it. Really, to try and make the most of that foreground interest, I thought I'd try a panorama. The camera's in portrait mode, so I can still get really close to the foreground and get the detail in there and get the detail in the sky. But then when I take the panorama, I then start to get all the interest from the left to the right. However, if that's going to work, I do not know, because there's so much water here, and every time a wave splashes, you'll get waves making a pattern in the water. And when you're doing a panorama, there are all these different areas where the waves are crashing, and if there's not enough rock, then either Lightroom or Photoshop is really going to struggle with trying to line those up, because it's going to see one crashing wave and try and match that with another crashing wave. But if there's enough foreground and background, hopefully I've taken enough photographs for it to stitch properly. So if it did work, you'll see that one now. Right, the sun has actually decided to come out. It's probably about an hour and a half before sunset. Unfortunately, I've been here all day and it hasn't come out at all. I got here about 7 in the morning and it's now about 5 o'clock at night and there's nothing. So I've just been walking around trying to get drama, really, of all the moody skies and the water and things like that. We might get some nice colours on these rocks and over there, I don't know. Otherwise, I may head off that way. I don't know if you can see, there's just a little beach over there. Now I might try and see if I can get to that before sunset, and I might be able to get a photograph looking this way with the lighthouse in it. If I don't get any photographs there, I'll end the video here. So I really do hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give me a thumbs up. If you have any comments, positive or negative, I really do like to read them. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing, because my channel really does need the help. So thank you very much, and I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.